Section 1. The End of Roman Britain. On this day, 2025, November 11th, we can look back over 16 centuries to a pivotal moment. The year was 410 AD. The Roman Empire was in trouble. Great armies from the north were pushing at its borders. Rome needed its soldiers back home to defend the heart of the empire. So the legions stationed in the province of Britannia packed their standards and marched away. They were not coming back. For nearly 400 years, Britain had been part of the organized Roman world. Now it was on its own. The Romano-Britons were left to face an uncertain future. This was not just an ending, it was the start of something new. The Roman departure left a huge power vacuum. Imagine a town where the police and the government suddenly vanished. Who would keep order? Who would fix the roads? The Romano-Britons had grown used to Roman laws, Roman money. Suddenly that security was gone. Local leaders, strongmen, warlords tried to take control. They fought amongst themselves for land and influence. The old Roman towns with fine stone buildings and bathhouses began to fall into disrepair. Without a central army, the island became vulnerable. Raiders from across the sea saw Britain as a rich land, ripe for the taking. The stage was set for a long and difficult transformation. Life did not change overnight for everyone. In the countryside, a farmer might still plough his fields as his father did. A potter might still make the same style of jars. But the big picture was shifting dramatically. The intricate network of Roman roads was no longer maintained. Trade with the rest of the Roman world dried up. Coins became scarce, and people returned to a system of barter, trading goods and services directly. The grand villas of wealthy Roman landowners were abandoned. A mist of uncertainty descended upon the island, a period often called the Dark Ages, not because it was evil, but because so little was written down. Before this, the island was a Roman outpost. After this, it began a long, slow journey toward becoming something else entirely. The legacy of Rome did not vanish completely. The routes of some modern roads still follow the straight lines laid down by Roman engineers. London, York, Bath, Roman foundations, but the culture, language, and people who would define the next chapter were about to arrive from across the North Sea. The departure of the legions in 410 AD was the closing of one book and the opening of another. Section 2. The arrival of the Anglo-Saxons. Into the vacuum left by the Romans came new peoples. They sailed across the cold North Sea in long wooden boats. They came from lands we now know as northern Germany, southern Denmark, and the Netherlands. We call them the Anglo-Saxons. The main groups were the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. At first, some may have been invited as mercenaries, paid soldiers hired by British leaders to fight off other raiders. But soon, they started coming as settlers. They were farmers looking for new land to plough. They were families looking for a new home. They were warriors seeking fortune and territory in a weak and divided land. Their arrival was not always peaceful. The Anglo-Saxons fought with the native Britons for control of the best land. The old stories, like the legends of King Arthur, may well be distant memories of this struggle, of British leaders fighting a desperate rear-guard action against the invaders. Over many decades, the Britons were pushed west into the areas we now call Wales and Cornwall, and north into parts of Scotland. The Anglo-Saxons took over the fertile lowlands of the south and east. They were not city dwellers like the Romans. They preferred to live in small villages, wattle and daub with thatched roofs to keep out the rain. These new settlements completely changed the landscape and the language. The Anglo-Saxons brought their own way of farming, clearing forests to create open fields for crops and pasture for animals. They gave new names to the places they settled. A place name ending in ing meant the people of, ham meant a homestead, and tun, which became ton, meant an enclosure or farmstead. So, places like Reading, Birmingham, and Southampton have their origins in the language of these early settlers. Their tongue, a Germanic language we call Old English, became the dominant language of the land. It is the direct ancestor of the English we speak today. The society they built was based on loyalty and kinship. At the heart of each community was the hall of the local lord or king. Here, warriors would gather to feast, listen to storytellers, recite epic poems, and pledge their loyalty to their leader in exchange for protection and gifts. They brought their own gods, figures like Woden, the god of kings and wisdom, and Thor, the god of thunder. We can still see their legacy in our days of the week. Wednesday is Woden's day, and Thursday is Thor's day. This was the foundation upon which England would be built. Kingdoms and Christianity. By the 7th century, the land was no longer just a collection of small settlements. It had organized itself into several larger kingdoms. These are known as the Heptarchy, a Greek word meaning 7 rulers. Northumbria in the north, Mercia in the Midlands, Wessex in the south, East Anglia, Essex, Kent, Sussex. The kings of these realms were often at war with one another. They fought for land, they fought for treasure, they fought for the title of Bretwalda, a kind of high king. A profound change began to sweep across these pagan kingdoms, the arrival of Christianity. It came from 2 different directions. From the south in 597 AD, the Pope in Rome sent a monk named Augustine to Kent. He converted its king Ethelbert. He established a base in Canterbury, which remains the centre of the Church of England today. From the north and west, Irish monks travelled into Northumbria. They established great monasteries on islands like Lindisfarne. They established great monasteries on islands like Iona. These 2 strands sometimes clashed over customs, but they shared the same core message. The conversion to Christianity had a massive impact on Anglo-Saxon society. Kings who became Christian believed they were chosen by God. That belief gave their rule new and powerful legitimacy. The Church brought with it the skills of reading and writing in Latin. Monasteries became the new centres of learning and culture, replacing the warriors' mead hall. Monks painstakingly copied out the Bible and other religious texts by hand. They also wrote down histories like the work of the Venerable Bede. They recorded the old epic poems like Beowulf. The Church built stone buildings, a technology largely forgotten since the Romans left. These monasteries were not just quiet places of prayer. They became wealthy and powerful landowners. Just as the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were becoming more stable and sophisticated, a new threat appeared from across the sea. In the year 793 AD, a wave of terror struck the holy island of Lindisfarne raiders in longships. Swift and fearsome vessels swept down on the undefended monastery. They killed the monks, stole the golden treasures, and sailed away. These were the Vikings, warriors from Scandinavia. This raid was the beginning of a new age of violence and upheaval. For the next century and more, the Vikings would return again and again, not just to raid, but to conquer and to settle. At first, the Viking raids were hit-and-run attacks on coastal targets, but their ambitions grew. They began to form large armies, which the Anglo-Saxons called the Great Heathen Army. They spent winters in England, then began to conquer entire kingdoms, Northumbria, East Anglia, Mercia. It seemed as if the whole of the land might fall under Viking control. The future of the English language and the Anglo-Saxon way of life hung by a thread. The King of Wessex at this critical time was a man named Alfred. He was a scholar and a warrior. After suffering a major defeat, Alfred retreated to the marshes of Somerset. From there, he gathered his forces and launched a surprise attack, winning a decisive victory against the Vikings at the Battle of Edington in 878 AD. This victory did not drive the Vikings out of England, but it saved Wessex and stopped their advance. Alfred made a treaty with the Viking leader, Guthrum. The treaty divided the land. The Vikings would control the north and east, an area that came to be known as the Danelaw. Alfred would rule the south and west. The Vikings were not just destroyers. Where they settled in the Danelaw, they became farmers and traders. They brought their own laws, customs and language. Their Norse language mixed with the Old English of the local population, adding many new words to our vocabulary, sky, leg, skin. They were great town builders and merchants. Cities like York, which they called Jorvik, became major centers of international trade. The presence of the Danelaw created a new political and cultural reality. The island was now divided between two different peoples, setting the stage for the next great struggle. The fight to unite it all into one kingdom. Alfred the Great did more than just fight the Vikings. He laid the foundations for a unified England. He understood that military victory was not enough. He reorganized his army to be more effective. He also built a network of fortified towns, called burhs, across his kingdom. These were places of refuge for the people and bases for his soldiers. Many of these burhs, like Oxford-Wallingford, grew into the prosperous market towns we know today. Alfred also believed in the power of education and religion. He learned Latin himself and arranged for important books to be translated into Old English so that his people could read them. He wanted to restore the learning that had been lost during the Viking Wars. His son, Edward the Elder, and his daughter, Ethelfled, the Lady of the Mercians, fought a long campaign to win back the lands of the Danelaw. They pushed north, capturing Viking strongholds and extending the rule of Wessex. It was Alfred's grandson, Ethelstan, who finally achieved the goal. In 927 AD, he captured the Viking city of York. He then went on to secure the submission of the rulers of Wales, Scotland. For the first time, one king ruled over all the people, Anglo-Saxon and Danish, who lived in the land that was now beginning to be called Engla-Lond, the land of the Angles. This new unified kingdom needed more than just a strong king. It needed a system of government to hold it together. The Anglo-Saxon kings developed a sophisticated system of administration. They divided the kingdom into shires, which are the basis for many of England's modern counties. Each shire had a royal official, the Shire Reeve, and enforcing the king's law. They issued laws, known as dooms, which were written down and applied across the kingdom. They also created a standard currency, with coins bearing the king's image, which made trade easier and was a powerful symbol of royal authority. This was a state that was, for its time, remarkably well organized. However, the threat from Scandinavia had not gone away. In the late 10th and early 11th centuries, new waves of Viking attacks began. This time, the Danish kings came not just to raid, but to conquer the entire kingdom. In 1016, the Danish king Canute, or Canute, became king of all England, but Canute ruled England not as a foreign conqueror, but as an English king, respecting its laws and customs. For a time, England was part of a great North Sea empire that also included Denmark-Norway. This period reinforced the close cultural ties between England and Scandinavia, but it also created a crisis of succession. When the line of Canute died out, the question of who had the right to be King of England was dangerously open. The year 1066 is one of the most famous dates in English history. It was a year of crisis and conquest. The English king, Edward the Confessor, died without a clear heir. One was Harold Godwinson, the most powerful English earl. Another was Harold Hardrada, the King of Norway. The third was William, the Duke of Normandy in northern France. Harold Godwinson was crowned king in England, but he had to fight on two fronts. He marched his army north to defeat the Norwegian invasion at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, but just days later he had to rush south again. William of Normandy had landed with his army on the Sussex coast. On October 14th, 1066, the two armies met on a hillside near Hastings. The battle raged all day. The English on foot formed a strong shield wall that the Norman knights on horseback could not break. But in the end, King Harold was killed, famously struck by an arrow in the eye, and the English army was defeated. William marched to London and was crowned King of England on Christmas Day. This event, the Norman Conquest, was the final, decisive invasion in England's story. It brought a sudden and brutal end to Anglo-Saxon rule and ushered in a completely new era. A new French-speaking aristocracy was imposed on the country. William the Conqueror replaced the English lords with his own Norman followers, rewarding them with vast estates of land. To control his new kingdom, he built stone castles all over the country. The language of power changed. The royal court, the law, and the government all operated in Norman French. Old English was now the language of the conquered peasants. For the next 300 years, the two languages lived side by side, gradually mixing together. This fusion of Old English and Norman French is what created the language we now speak. Modern English, a tongue rich with words from both Germanic and Latin roots. The period from the Roman departure in 410 to the Norman arrival in 1066 was the crucible in which England was forged. It was a time of migration, conflict, and fusion. The Anglo-Saxons laid the foundations, the language, the villages, the idea of the shires. The Vikings added their own words, their trading spirit, and forced the Anglo-Saxons to unite against them. The Normans added a new layer of government, a new aristocracy, and a new language for the ruling class. When we walk through England today, we are walking through this history. We see it in the names of our towns and villages, we hear it in the words we speak. This distant past is not so distant after all. It is deeply embedded in the identity of the nation.